So let's talk about the Chiefs running backs. You've written this story for Arrowhead Report, and I think it'd be really interesting to talk about because the Chiefs have a dynamic, I would say, running back room now. When you start to look at this position group, what do you think of it?
I like it, man. And you look at the expectation heading into last season. It's Clyde was drafted in the first round, so people said, well, he better be damn good in the passing game. He better be a good running back with the great contact balance that he displayed at LSU, the great agility, the short area burst, stuff like that. And he flashed some of that stuff. But then you look at the rushing attack as a whole, given that Clyde was also injured for part of the season. 16th in the NFL in rushing yards as a team for the Chiefs, so they're right down the middle. Now, part of that isn't necessarily reflective upon their running back group because the Chiefs just don't run the ball a ton anyway. That's not really their MO. They have a decent quarterback in Patrick Mahomes that can kind of bail them out in that sense. But nevertheless, of all running backs, I wish I had the article in front of me, but I think of all backs who played at least 10 games, like I sorted it specifically, Clyde was like 14th in targets per game. And that can't happen this season. You had guys like McCaffrey that missed a lot of time and Saquon Barkley. So it was kind of hard to kind of sort through those stats. I had to manually go do it. But nevertheless, you'd like him to get more than 4.2 targets a game, and that sounds like a lot. But for a guy that isn't going to catch all of his targets, because that's just not how the NFL works, was supposed to be potentially a third receiving option for this team. Like, especially this year, I think that that's a possibility. So at the top, I know that we'll talk about the other guys here in a second. Clyde's going to be really important this year.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think I can't remember who it was at the KC Sports Network. I believe it was, I want to say it was Kent wrote a story about Clyde Edwards-Helaire's usage. A friend of the program, Kent Swanson, wrote about it, and he was talking about how, okay, maybe seeing, those 4.2 targets per game isn't good, but then you kind of have to look at the style of how the Chiefs play, right? Patrick Mahomes is looking deep, and then he works back down. So getting those 4.2 targets, he's not, the main receiver in a lot of those targets.
Yeah.
If you look at how he was used at LSU, he was sometimes the main receiver in some of those plays that they were running for him. And I anticipate them to have some main passing plays for Clyde Edwards-Helaire this season, just because he's getting a season under, or he has a season under his belt now. Now he's getting a full off season under his belt, how it's supposed to be in the NFL. I think that'll obviously benefit him greatly. But you mentioned he does have, he's got to step up to take. There's room for improvement, certainly. And I think that the way we all see Clyde Edwards-Helaire is as a dynamic pass threat option, as a dynamic running back as well. I think that this is kind of the year where his usage could really take a step up in that right direction, and I think it needs to really justify that pick. And I've brought this point up. It seems like every time we talk about Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I bring up the offensive line. Right, this offensive line is revamped. That'll help him in the running game. That'll help the Chiefs be more efficient in running the ball. Now, I'm not all the way on the spectrum of saying never run the ball ever, just always throw the football. I'm not there. I know you got to run the ball sometimes. It's all about running the ball more effectively, more efficiently. And I think the Chiefs' offensive line is now at a point where they can, once they start to gel, run the ball more efficiently, more effectively. And I think that'll reflect on not just Clyde Edwards-Helaire, but this whole room underneath him, the whole depth, the whole position group.
Yeah, 100%. And not to say that Darrell Williams will lose snaps by his own fault. It's not going to be his fault at all because he played well last season. He had some key third down plays. He was a 2-minute drill back. He was just reliable. Like, he knew the system. He knew how to run the routes that Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes wanted him to run. He was a good pass blocker, stuff like that. Clyde will hopefully take over stuff like that and roles like that and proficiencies like that this season. So Darrell may not have as big of a role. Le'Veon Bell's no longer there. He was a little underwhelming, I would say. And then it turns out the feeling was mutual a little bit between him and the Chiefs. So that's that. Then you look at a guy like Darwin Thompson. I remember that article I wrote week 17. I was so pumped and happy for him. He had a great game. He stood out. I'm always going to root for Darwin Thompson, but he's probably on the outside looking in right now because the Chiefs did add a guy in Jerick McKinnon who me and you are both really high on. He had 2 years away from the game, or I guess out of regular season snaps due to injuries. Came back, played in San Fran, or maybe it was Minnesota, vice versa. I forget which team he spent the majority of his career with, then came back. It must have been Minnesota last year. And then played pretty well. Like, he's a guy that is going to get you quite a few targets. He's going to catch those balls. He's going to get receiving yards. He's going to score all-purpose touchdowns. Good pass blocker. Andy Reid talked about him and mentioned experience as something that was huge, and being willing to and excited to give him more of a kind of the playbook and say, here, we're just going to throw it at you. Like, he's talked about him and Clyde in the same vein almost, in that they're capable of accepting more, and he wants to give them more. So the running back group, I think I'm really excited for. I think the Chiefs are going to get more out of that group this season, whether it be on the ground with the revamped offensive line, or Clyde running those angle routes out of the backfield and catching passes, taking off bigger plays. The Chiefs, one of the downsides with Patrick Mahomes, besides the whole taking 50,000 step drops in the pocket or kind of collapsing it by himself, they do read the field kind of down the field and back. If the routes are crisper, if Clyde gets open better or quicker or easier, maybe that changes a little bit.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And I think that the dynamic that McKinnon brings to us is really good pass blocking. The Chiefs got better in terms of pass blocking backs and adding an extra protection. Sometimes you just want to add well, that would be a 7-man protection at that point, maybe 6-man.
Yeah.
I guess it depends on if you bring in the tight end or not. But a 6-man protection at least, if you got a good running back in there. Like Darrell Williams is a good pass blocking running back. You know, Jerick McKinnon, good pass blocking running back. They want Clyde Edwards-Helaire to get to that spot where he can be a good pass blocking running back as well, where if you see him on the field, you're not just expecting him to go out for a route or to run the ball. He can also block as well. So I think that's kind of something they want to see him improve a little bit more. And I do think this room got a really big upgrade in that when they added Jerick McKinnon in terms of pass blocking. Really like him. He was kind of run out of town with Dalvin Cook when Dalvin Cook was drafted in Minnesota. Then he tore his ACL. And then I think he went to San Francisco. You were talking about his whole path. That got me thinking about it. I think he tore his ACL, went to San Francisco, then had like a setback with it, then came back with San Francisco. He signed like a 3-year deal with San Francisco, something like that. But yeah, I like Jerick McKinnon a lot. It seems like every time we have a podcast, I say people aren't talking about Jerick McKinnon a lot. But I'm talking about Jerick McKinnon a lot just to make sure that you guys know that Jerick McKinnon's on this team. He's going to make the roster. You mentioned with Darwin Thompson, man. I do really like Darwin Thompson as a back, as a guy. It's just like there's too many cooks. That room's too full. It sucks that he's probably going to be the odd man out. I don't see them carrying 4 running backs into the regular season when it comes to the 53-man roster. But I guess they could. I mean, I guess they took Anthony Sherman, right, when it comes to that, and I guess he was considered that 4th running back. But that's a whole different story when it comes to the whole how this 53-man roster is going to shake out. There could be some injuries in places we don't anticipate it, all that stuff. But yeah, I do really like how this running back room has shaped up, is looking, and I think the Clyde Edwards-Helaire kind of factor, I guess. I still feel like there's a relatively unknown component when it comes to Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Do you kind of feel the same?
Yeah, absolutely, because you don't know, first and foremost, how the Chiefs are going to use him this year, and you don't know how he's going to show that improvement on the field. Like, he could be a better route runner this year and the Chiefs still couldn't use him right, or the Chiefs could force him into a feature and then he may not be ready for it or may not be capable, and maybe he was just a really, really, really good college running back that's a slightly above average NFL back. Like, there's just an element of the unknown. I think that his rookie season was kind of weird in the usage and the injuries and stuff like that, to where I don't feel less optimistic about him necessarily heading into the season, but I think that some of that like full-blown optimism has kind of shifted into cautious optimism, and that's kind of me in a nutshell. I think like now it's all about cautious optimism, and I think everyone can attest to that as well. But I think the Chiefs are going to be fun on offense. Like, without that true number 2 receiver, Antonio Callaway has been brought up quite a bit as a guy that I didn't expect that. Like, I thought no one would be talking about him. Reed wouldn't bring him up. Mahomes wouldn't bring him up. The media wouldn't really bring him up. Like, it seems like maybe he has a better shot of carving out at least somewhat of a role than I thought, at least heading into the offseason. But nevertheless, Clyde could realistically be third on the team in targets, I think. Like, I don't think that's a stretch to say, especially considering D-Rob and McCole, and then Pringle and Callaway and Powell, and then your Week 17 like Marcus Kemp or Garrett Dieter type game. There's a lot of cooks in the kitchen, and it's going to be up to the Chiefs, like, who they want taking the dishes out, who they want cooking this, who they want on saute, who they want like chopping salad. Like, there's only so many jobs to do. There's a lot of cooks ready to do them. And it's fun to have running backs involved in the receiving game. Like, your wideouts are good. Travis Kelce is obviously Travis Kelce. He's going to get his. Tyreek Hill's going to get his. But having that threat is going to help them quite a bit.
That will do it for today's podcast preview. If you enjoyed the preview, make sure to check out the full show out on your favorite podcast provider. Don't know how to find it? Go to smarturl.it/roughing. Got a splash page. You can find your favorite provider there and find the show there, or go into the search bar of your favorite show, type in Roughing the Kicker. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like. It really helps us out. If you enjoy the channel and the podcast as a whole, subscribe and obviously get that notification bell on, because you don't want to miss any more podcast previews. We'll be back with another video soon. So until then, I'll talk to you next time.